The woman with nothing left. The sky hung heavy with gray clouds, the kind that warned the world it might rain, but never quite followed through. Downtown Los Angeles moved in its usual rhythm. Too fast for the broken-hearted, too slow for the desperate. People brushed past each other without looking, their faces buried in their phones or turned toward their own silent worries. No one noticed the woman sitting near the back entrance of a coffee shop, cradling a paper cup of hot water between her trembling hands. Her name was Melissa. She hadn't eaten in 23 hours, and she had only $10 left in her purse. Melissa's coat was too thin for the season. Her shoes had holes in both soles, and her dreams had gone quiet weeks ago. Once she had a plan. She had a job as a waitress, an apartment she could barely afford, and a dog named Riley who used to greet her at the door like she was the whole world. But the apartment was gone now. Riley had been taken to a shelter, and her job had vanished overnight when the diner closed down without notice. In a city filled with stars, Melissa had become invisible. As she sat there watching people rush into the coffee shop without a glance, her way a sudden movement caught her eye. A man slumped against a brick wall across the street had been sitting there for nearly an hour. Unlike the other homeless people she passed on her way downtown, this man looked different. Not cleaner, not dirtier. Just different. He wore a large gray hoodie with the hood pulled down low, and his beard was untrimmed. But his posture wasn't slouched from defeat. It was still calm, like someone who had made peace with something the world could never understand. Melissa tried to look away. She didn't have enough for both of them. She told herself that. But something gnawed at her, something deeper than hunger. It was the quiet ache of remembering who she used to be, the kind of person who believed in doing what was right, even when it hurt. Especially when it hurt. She stood brushing off crumbs of dirt from her jeans. She crossed the street. The man didn't look up. He didn't speak. He didn't even reach for anything. "Hi," she said softly, crouching beside him. "I know this might sound silly, but I only have $10. I was going to get something to eat, but you look like you need it more." She held it out, folded between two trembling fingers. He didn't take it. Instead, he looked at her for the first time. His eyes were dark but kind, with the kind of sadness that doesn't beg for pity. It simply exists. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice rough like sandpaper but quiet, almost respectful. Melissa nodded, biting the inside of her cheek to keep from crying. "I can wait a little longer. I'll be fine." He took the bill slowly, as if holding something sacred. Then, to her surprise, he smiled. It was a small smile, but real. "Thank you," he whispered. She nodded again, then turned away quickly, embarrassed by her own emotion. As she crossed the street, she heard his voice behind her, calling gently. "What's your name?" "Melissa," she answered without looking back. "Thank you, Melissa," he said again. "You've just changed something." She didn't understand what he meant. Maybe he was just being polite. Maybe he was trying to make her feel like the gesture had mattered. She went back to her corner, curling into herself as the cold wind blew through the buildings. The $10 were gone, but strangely her chest felt lighter than before, like she'd just let go of something heavier than money. Hours passed. The sky darkened. The man across the street had vanished. The next day, Melissa returned to the same spot, not because she had anywhere better to be, but because some part of her hoped he'd be there. He wasn't. Instead, a sleek black car rolled up to the curb. It was completely out of place among the cracked sidewalks and flickering street lamps. The window rolled down and a woman in a black coat leaned out. "Melissa?" she asked. Melissa blinked. "Yes?" The woman smiled gently. "You've been invited somewhere. I think you've got the wrong person." "No," the woman said firmly. "You're exactly who we're looking for." Melissa hesitated. "Who are you?" "Someone who works for someone whose life you just touched." Melissa stepped back, uncertain. "Is this a joke?" The woman opened the passenger door and gestured inside. "It's not. You can say no, but if you say yes, you'll be safe. Tonight. And warm. Melissa's stomach twisted. Everything in her life had trained her not to trust strangers, not to believe in miracles. But this woman's eyes were kind, and she was tired of being cold. "Okay," Melissa whispered. She stepped into the car. The door shut behind her with a soft click. The leather seat smelled like new beginnings. They drove in silence for 10 minutes before Melissa asked again, "Who is this person?" The woman looked at her through the rearview mirror. "Keanu Reeves." Melissa froze. The name echoed in her head like thunder. She had to have misheard. "What?" The woman turned a corner and smiled. "Yesterday you gave your last $10 to a man who didn't look like he had anything. You didn't know he was one of the most famous and humble men in the world, and he didn't tell you, but he remembered." Melissa's breath caught in her throat. "That was him?" The woman nodded. "But he was dressed like—" "Yes," the woman said. "Because sometimes he walks the city to see what people are really like, to see kindness that isn't bought or forced. And yesterday he saw you." Melissa's hands trembled again, but not from hunger, from disbelief. They pulled up to a quiet house on a hill. Nothing fancy, not a mansion, just peaceful. Warm lights glowed from inside. "Come in," the woman said. Melissa followed her through the gate, through the front door. And there, sitting in the living room with a mug of tea in his hands, was the man from the street. He looked up. "Melissa," he said, standing slowly. "I'm so glad you came." She stared at him, lost for words. "I have something to tell you," he added. And before she could respond, the room fell silent, as if the world was holding its breath. The truth beneath the beard. Melissa stepped deeper into the room, her shoes making barely a sound against the polished wooden floor. She could hear her own heartbeat in her ears, louder than the ticking of the antique clock resting on a side table. It all felt like a dream she hadn't earned, an illusion too beautiful to belong to someone like her. For a long moment she just stood there, frozen by a lifetime of disappointment, of closed doors, and cold nights. Keanu Reeves, the man who had sat barefoot and silent across from her on the street, was now standing only a few steps away, dressed in a simple black sweater and jeans, his posture still as humble as before. There were no cameras, no handlers, no bright lights, just him, his soft smile, and eyes that held something deeper than recognition. They held a story, and it had something to do with her. He motioned toward the couch across from him. Melissa hesitated, but then moved toward it, sitting on the edge as if she might need to flee. She wasn't used to comfort. She wasn't used to being seen. Keanu sat across from her and cradled his mug as if it gave him courage. "Before I explain anything," he said slowly, "I want to thank you again. People pass each other every day and they rarely stop to look, let alone help. You looked, you cared. And not because you knew who I was, but because you're the kind of person who would give even when you have nothing." Melissa lowered her eyes. "I didn't do it for thanks," she whispered. "I just couldn't ignore someone suffering. It didn't seem right. And that's exactly why it mattered," he said gently. "Because the world is full of people who walk by, but you stopped. And what you didn't know was that I wasn't just walking the streets for myself. I was looking for someone." Melissa blinked. "Someone?" He nodded. "I've been part of a quiet project for the past year. No media, no headlines. Just me and a small team trying to help people in ways that really matter. Not just writing checks or attending galas, but actually finding individuals with hearts big enough to change the world, even if they don't know it yet. We wanted to see kindness without cameras, honesty without conditions. And then, you happened." Melissa's throat tightened. "But why me? I'm nobody. I'm broke. I have no job. I have no home. I don't even have my dog anymore." "You're not nobody," he said firmly. "You're someone who gave everything just to make someone else's day better. You didn't know who I was, and still you gave your last $10 to a stranger. That means more than any amount of wealth or status. And that's exactly the kind of person we were searching for. Melissa looked at him, her eyes shining with disbelief. But what can someone like me do? I don't have anything left. Keanu leaned forward, setting his mug on the table. You still have your soul, your integrity, and now you have a choice. Her brow furrowed. A choice? Yes, he said. You can take this night as a moment of comfort and walk away tomorrow with some food, a warm bed, and maybe a few more dollars in your pocket. Or you can let us help you rebuild your life. Truly rebuild it. Not just survive, but thrive. We're working with people who were overlooked. We're helping them start again. From jobs to housing, from therapy to training. Everything. Melissa's lips parted, but no words came out. She felt overwhelmed, like someone had just opened a door that led to a place she stopped believing existed. Why are you doing this? She asked finally, her voice cracking. You don't even know me. Keanu paused, then leaned back in his chair and exhaled deeply. I do know you. More than you realize. Because years ago, before all of this, I was broken too. I lost people I loved. I lost parts of myself. And there were nights when I didn't know if I'd make it to the morning. The only thing that saved me was kindness. Quiet, unshakable kindness from strangers who didn't ask for anything in return. I swore that if I ever got a second chance at life, I'd spend it looking for those same people and giving them what I was given. Melissa felt tears streaming down her face, though she wasn't sure when they had started. She wiped them quickly, ashamed. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, he replied. You've already done enough. Just then, the woman who had picked her up stepped back into the room. She carried a folder in her hands and handed it to Melissa. Inside were documents, papers about housing programs, job training, healthcare, even reuniting with lost pets. At the very bottom, there was a photo of a familiar brown and white dog wagging its tail behind the fence of a shelter. Melissa gasped. Riley? She whispered. Keanu smiled. Yes. We've found him. He's safe. And if you want, he can come home with you. Melissa clutched the photo to her chest like it was gold. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. Everything that had been ripped away, her home, her hope, her sense of belonging, was now being offered back, piece by piece. But then, a dark thought crept in. What if I mess it up? She asked, her voice trembling. What if I can't hold on to it? Keanu looked at her with unwavering calm. You're not alone anymore, Melissa. No one's asking you to be perfect, only to keep trying. A deep silence filled the room, the kind of silence that heals. And then, Keanu stood up. There's one more thing. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small necklace. It was old, simple, with a tiny silver charm shaped like a tree. He placed it gently in her palm. I was given this when I had nothing, he said. A woman once told me even when you're buried, you can still grow. That tree reminded me that I still had roots. Now it's yours. Melissa held the necklace tightly, her fingers pressing into the smooth silver. Thank you, she said, her voice shaking. I don't know how to repay you. Keanu's smile softened. Just promise me something. Anything. One day when you see someone sitting alone, hungry and hurting, don't walk by. She nodded slowly, tears falling again. I promise. Just as she said it, the house phone rang. The woman answered it, her expression shifting. You should both hear this, she said, walking back into the room. There's something you need to see. She turned on the television. The screen lit up with breaking news. A viral video had surfaced. Grainy street footage taken the day before showed Melissa crouching down and offering money to a man on the sidewalk. The man, unrecognizable in his worn hoodie and scruffy beard, was later confirmed to be Keanu Reeves. The video had exploded online. People around the world were praising Melissa's selflessness, calling her the angel with $10. Melissa's face went pale. How did they know? Keanu looked at the screen thoughtfully. I didn't record it, but sometimes the world sees things when it needs to. He turned to her and added, "Are you ready for what comes next?" And with that question, the room seemed to freeze again, caught between the life she had lived and the one waiting just beyond this moment. A world that suddenly knew her name. Melissa had lived most of her life in the shadows, never expecting the world to notice her. She was used to walking past crowds without leaving a trace, used to sleeping on worn mattresses in rented corners, used to being someone whose pain didn't echo beyond her skin. But as she sat in Keanu Reeves' living room, watching herself on the news through the eyes of strangers, something inside her shifted. The video played again, her tired face, her hand holding out that crumpled $10 bill, the way she looked at the man with compassion instead of judgment. The same act that once felt so small was now being dissected by talking heads, praised by morning anchors, and shared across 1,000 screens. She was no longer invisible. She was now a symbol. And she wasn't ready for it. The woman beside the television muted the sound and turned toward Melissa. "You're going to get a lot of attention over the next few days. Some of it will be kind, some will be curious, and some may be cruel. The internet has a way of turning humans into headlines. We're here to make sure that doesn't break you." Melissa looked at her with wide eyes. "I didn't ask for this." "We know," the woman said gently. "But sometimes the world chooses its heroes. And you, Melissa, just became one of them." Keanu stood beside her now, his hand resting on the back of the couch. "We've already assigned someone to help you navigate it. Legal support, online protection, media filters. You won't be alone through this." But Melissa wasn't thinking about cameras or articles or hashtags. Her mind had wandered back to the woman she used to be before the fall. The girl who worked 12-hour shifts and still brought leftover fries to her neighbor's kids. The woman who cried when Riley got a splinter in his paw. That woman had vanished under the weight of rent notices and sleepless nights. Now the world wanted her to be strong again, to speak, to smile, to inspire others. "I don't know how to be this version of myself," she admitted. "I'm still trying to survive." Keanu nodded, his voice calm and understanding. "You don't have to be anything but real. The world doesn't need perfection. It needs people who've walked through fire and are still willing to love." Those words wrapped around her like a blanket. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to take a deep breath without guilt. Still, the question haunted her. Why? Had life chosen this exact moment to change? And why her? The following morning, everything moved faster than she expected. She was taken to a quiet studio on the outskirts of the city, far from the flashing paparazzi. Keanu didn't leave her side, not even for a moment. They entered through a back entrance while the press camped out front. Inside, they met a woman, named Lena, a calm soul with glasses perched on her nose and a voice that soothed like warm tea. She was a media coach, someone trained to help people speak without crumbling under pressure. "You don't need to perform," Lena told her gently. "Just share your heart. People don't connect with Polish. They connect with truth." Melissa sat before a soft-lit camera. The studio was quiet. The producer gave a silent signal. She inhaled deeply, the kind of breath that reaches old scars. Then she spoke. "My name is Melissa. I didn't think anyone would care about a woman like me. I gave $10 to a man because I knew what it felt like to be hungry. I wasn't trying to be a hero, I just didn't want to feel useless anymore. I didn't know he was someone famous, and honestly, I don't think it would have changed anything." She paused, her voice faltering. "What I do know is this. We're all hurting in some way, all of us. But we still get to choose who we become even when the world isn't watching." Tears ran down her cheeks, but this time she didn't wipe them away. When the recording stopped, the room was silent. Even the cameraman looked affected. That clip was posted later that afternoon, and within hours, it had been viewed by millions. People from all over the globe began reaching out. Mothers, veterans, college students, retired teachers, sharing how Melissa's moment of quiet generosity had reignited their hope in humanity. Some sent messages saying they had just fed a stranger because of her. Others said they called a family member they hadn't spoken to in years. One little girl from Michigan sent a video saying she emptied her piggy bank to buy food for a shelter, dog, and named it Riley. But along with the light came the shadows. Tabloids started digging. They uncovered old photos, debts, eviction records. Trolls emerged online, accusing her of staging the event. Some questioned her past, her motives, her worth. Melissa sat in her temporary apartment, gifted to her by the nonprofit Keanu supported, and scrolled through comment after comment. Praise, judgment, confusion, cruelty. She felt like she was drowning in noise. She turned off the screen and curled up on the couch, Riley resting beside her, his head on her lap. She whispered into the silence, "Maybe I'm not cut out for this." A knock came at the door. She opened it slowly, and there stood Keanu, holding 2 cups of coffee and wearing the same hoodie from that day on the street. "I figured you might need a friend," he said. She stepped aside wordlessly and let him in. They sat across from each other, the apartment still smelling faintly of fresh paint and new beginnings. "Why does the world turn on people so fast?" Melissa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because it's easier to tear someone down than to look inward," Keanu replied. "People get scared when they see raw goodness. It forces them to ask themselves if they've stopped caring, and instead of changing, they sometimes attack the reminder." Melissa stared at him, the weight of his words sinking in. "You've been through this," she said. "More times than I can count," he admitted. "But I've also seen how quickly it fades. The world forgets headlines, but they never forget heart." He reached into his bag and handed her another envelope. This time it wasn't a contract or another opportunity. It was a stack of handwritten letters from people she'd unknowingly helped. Strangers who'd watched the video and found courage in her eyes. Melissa read one aloud. "You reminded me to be kind to my mom even when we argue. Thank you for being the person I want to grow up to be." Another read. "I was going to give up. Then I saw you, and I didn't." Her hands trembled. "I don't know what to do with all of this." "Just keep going," Keanu said. "That's all any of us can do. And when the noise gets too loud, remember what you felt the moment you gave me that $10. That was real. That was pure. Everything else is just static." Melissa looked out the window where the city lights blinked like tiny promises in the dark. She had no idea what tomorrow would bring, fame or silence, more headlines or quiet days. But for the first time in years, she wasn't afraid. Not because life had gotten easier, but because she had remembered who she was beneath the weight of it all. And somewhere in that quiet, the fire inside her began to burn again. The table she never thought she'd sit at, the days that followed, were like walking through a dream with sharp edges, beautiful, surreal, but still capable of cutting deep. Melissa woke each morning in her new apartment, unsure if the world outside would still be whispering her name. She had gone from being unseen to being everywhere, on billboards, news headlines, talk shows, and online reels that used her voice, like a sacred echo. People debated her as if she were an idea instead of a person. And through it all, Keanu stayed close. Not in the way of someone watching over her, but like someone walking beside her, equal in pain, equal in purpose. One morning, she received an invitation that changed everything again. A handwritten note slipped under her door, on thick paper with a red wax seal. It simply read, "Your voice deserves to be heard by more than just cameras. Join us this Friday. No stage, no script, just truth. K." Attached was a name and location, an address in the hills that looked like it belonged on a magazine cover. She stared at it, unsure what to feel. Excitement, fear, unworthiness. By Friday evening, she stood in front of a large wrought iron gate, her palms sweaty, her breath uneven. The car that had picked her up was sleek and silent, driven by a man in a simple black suit who didn't say much beyond, "You look ready," but she didn't feel ready. Not for whatever waited behind that gate. As the car pulled through and curved along a private driveway flanked by soft garden lights, Melissa saw the house. It wasn't a mansion in the shallow sense. It was elegant, yes, but warm. Golden lights glowed through large windows, casting shadows of people inside who laughed and clinked glasses, unaware they were about to meet someone who once slept on concrete with nothing but a memory of warmth. The door opened before she could knock. Standing there was Keanu. No red carpet, no spotlight, just the same hoodie, the same smile that made everything feel human again. "Come in," he said. "You're safe here." Melissa stepped into the house. The smell of fresh bread and citrus hung in the air. Soft jazz played from somewhere in the background. Inside the living room stood 10 people, some famous, some familiar, others completely unknown. But every one of them turned to greet her not with cameras or staged applause, but with eyes that saw her. "We call this the table," Keanu said as he led her in. "It's where we bring people who've done something rare. People who remind the rest of us what it means to care." The table wasn't a metaphor. It was literal. A long oak dining table in the center of the room set for 12, each place marked with nothing but a first name handwritten on a folded card. At the head was one that said Melissa. Her legs trembled as she walked to it. "I'm not sure I belong here," she said softly. Keanu stepped beside her. "Yes, you do. More than anyone." Through the evening, they shared stories, each person recounting a moment when kindness changed them. A war veteran who was pulled from depression by a child's drawing. A singer who left fame to volunteer in hospice care. A woman who had once been rescued from a trafficking ring and now ran a safe house. Each story was raw, painful, beautiful. Then the room quieted. All eyes turned to Melissa. She didn't have a speech. She had no rehearsed words. Just a memory. That still felt fresh. "I was hungry," she began, her voice shaking. "And I was alone. And I think the hardest part wasn't the hunger or the cold, it was feeling invisible. Like I could disappear and no one would notice." She paused. A few faces nodded in recognition. "When I gave that $10, it wasn't because I had extra. I gave it because in that moment I needed to remember who I was. I needed to believe that even when I had nothing, I could still be kind." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of understanding, of shared pain, of truth that didn't need decoration. Keanu broke the silence first. "Sometimes the most powerful people are the ones who don't know they're powerful. They don't lead armies or own empires. They just carry light into dark places." After dinner, they moved to a smaller room filled with books and soft couches. Keanu handed Melissa a file. Inside were several envelopes. "These are scholarships, small grants, partnership, offers. Each one is from someone who saw your video and believed in your spirit. They don't want you to be a spokesperson. They just want to help you build something, anything." Melissa thumbed through the papers. One offer was from a tech firm that offered to train her in digital marketing. Another from a nonprofit in New York that supported women rebuilding their lives. And tucked in between was a letter from a local school asking if she'd speak to students about resilience. She looked up at Keanu, overwhelmed. "How can I choose?" "Start with what brings you peace," he said. "Don't chase applause. Chase meaning." That night, as the gathering faded and the guests hugged their goodbyes, Melissa stood by the window, watching the wind stir through the tall trees outside. Keanu walked up beside her, holding 2 mugs of tea. "This isn't the end," he said. "It's just the beginning." "But what if I mess it up?" she asked again, that old fear creeping back. He smiled. "You already changed the world, even if it was just one heart at a time. Now imagine what happens when you do it on purpose." As they sipped their tea, neither of them noticed the camera on the windowsill, set by one of the guests earlier in the evening. It wasn't recording the party. It wasn't capturing speeches or clinking glasses. It was focused on one thing. The quiet moment between 2 people, one of whom had once been called a nobody, now being reminded she was everything. That clip would go on to become a symbol of healing, not because it was dramatic, but because it was real. And as Melissa fell asleep later that night with Riley snoring beside her and the necklace Keanu gave her resting on her chest, she whispered to the dark, "I'm still here, and I'm not invisible anymore." When broken voices become bridges, the days stretched into weeks, but they felt nothing like before. Time moved differently now, not with the sharp sting of desperation, but with the gentle pull of purpose. Melissa woke up each morning with her dog, Riley, curled at her feet, the warmth of the sun creeping through her small apartment window, and a quiet understanding that her life would never be the same again. But unlike the past, when change had been cruel and unexpected, this change felt like a long-forgotten promise finally fulfilled. Even so, she still carried the weight of doubt. No matter how many letters arrived or how many doors opened, a part of her still whispered that it could all be taken away in a heartbeat. Keanu understood that silence without her ever needing to explain. He visited often, never with fanfare, always alone. He brought simple things, books she might like, fresh bread from a bakery he swore was magic, or just a pair of earbuds to sit in quiet and listen to music together. She asked him once why he gave her so much of his time, when he could be doing anything else in the world. His answer had been simple: because you reminded me who I am. Sometimes we all need someone to do that. One afternoon, after she'd returned from a local shelter where she'd started volunteering in the pet recovery unit, Keanu called her to meet at a small community center tucked between two faded buildings downtown. It wasn't glamorous, just a modest space with folding chairs and a linoleum floor. But the moment she stepped inside, she understood. The room was filled with people just like her. Men and women with worn shoes and tired eyes, most of them too quiet, as if life had taught them not to speak unless spoken to. Melissa knew that silence. She had lived inside it. Keanu stood at the front, not as a celebrity, but as one of them. "This is the first meeting of something new," he said. "We're not here to give handouts. We're here to build each other, back up piece by piece." He turned to Melissa and gestured for her to join him. She walked slowly to the front, her heart thudding. Every step felt like stepping into a version of herself she wasn't sure she was ready to become. But then she looked at them. The way they leaned in to hear her, the way their eyes reflected the same battles she'd once fought alone. She began to speak. "I spent a long time believing I didn't matter. I thought kindness was something only people with extra could afford. I thought no one would ever notice if I disappeared. But one day, I made a choice. Not because I had anything to give, but because I didn't want to lose who I was." She paused. Her throat tightened, but she kept going. "I gave my last $10 to a man I thought needed it. And that moment changed everything. Not because of who he turned out to be, but because it reminded me that I still had something left inside. Something no one could take." The room was quiet, but it wasn't heavy. It was reverent. She stepped back and others began to stand. A man in his 60s who hadn't spoken in weeks told the room he used to be a teacher. A young mother with bruises under her sleeve said she wanted to learn again. A veteran with shaking hands said he missed the feeling of being seen. One by one, voices long buried found air again. And just like that, something sacred began. The meetings continued every week. Melissa didn't lead them, not officially, but she became their anchor. She listened, more than she spoke. When someone needed food, she found it. When someone needed silence, she offered presence. Keanu came when he could, sometimes just sitting in the back with his hood up, watching lives slowly find their color again. The media caught wind of the group eventually, but this time Melissa stood her ground. "You can talk about us," she said firmly to a news outlet, "but not as a story of pity. If you cover us, you cover our courage, not our suffering." The journalists agreed. And to her surprise, the articles that followed were filled with respect. They called the group the Bridge Circle, a place where brokenness wasn't a weakness but a doorway to strength. Then, one day, something unexpected happened. Melissa received a call from an old number, one she hadn't seen in years. Her mother, the woman who had once told her she was throwing her life away chasing kindness, who hadn't spoken to her since the eviction. Melissa answered with shaking hands. "Hi," her mother said after a long pause. "I saw your video, the one about the $10. Silence. "I didn't know you were hurting like that. I should have been there." More silence. I'm proud of you. Those words unraveled something inside Melissa that had been wound tight for years. Her mother asked if they could meet. Melissa agreed, unsure if she was ready, but knowing that bridges weren't built by waiting, they were built by trying. When they met, it wasn't perfect. Her mother cried. Melissa didn't. They sat for hours in a park near the coffee shop where the whole story began, neither one knowing exactly what to say. But sometimes, healing starts in the silence between apologies. They walked together after, slowly like strangers learning to be family again. The next morning, Melissa returned to the shelter. One of the workers ran up to her, beaming. "You'll never believe this," she said. "Someone made a donation in your name, enough to renovate the whole center. They said you'd know why." Melissa opened the letter attached to the check. It read, "For the woman who gave everything when she had nothing. You didn't just feed a stranger, you fed the world. Keep going." A quiet admirer. She didn't have to guess. The handwriting was the same as the note with the red wax seal. She folded it slowly, holding it to her chest, not because of the money, but because of the truth in it. Melissa walked outside, feeling the wind brush against her skin. The world was still loud. It was still messy. But now she wasn't just reacting to it. She was shaping it. And somewhere, in the distance behind the noise and headlines, she knew another person was watching. Not from a pedestal, but from the street corner where it had all begun. Keanu had disappeared again, doing what he did best, planting hope where it was least expected. As the sun began to set, casting the city in golden light, Melissa turned to one of the women in the shelter and asked softly, "Want to take a walk with me?" "Where to?" "Anywhere people feel invisible." Because now she knew exactly what to say. The legacy of $10, the early morning air was thick with fog, wrapping the city in a soft gray blanket, as if Los Angeles itself were pausing to breathe before another day of noise and motion. Melissa stood on the balcony of her modest but beautiful new apartment, her arms folded over the railing, her thoughts drifting like the mist. Down below, the streets had begun to stir. Delivery, vans humming, footsteps tapping, the distant crackle of a street vendor setting up shop. But all of it sounded different now, like a rhythm she was finally in tune with instead of trying to keep up with. Her phone buzzed softly beside her. She didn't rush to check it, not anymore. For the first time in years, her sense of urgency had been replaced with something deeper, calm. Inside, Riley stirred from his bed, stretching with a low yawn and padding over to her side. Melissa looked down at him, smiling, remembering the nights they both went to sleep hungry. Now, as the fog lifted and the sun began to slice through the haze, she realized something simple but powerful. She was no longer waiting for the world to rescue her. She had already rescued herself the moment she chose kindness over fear. Her schedule today was full, but not with struggle, with meaning. She had an appointment with a local architect to discuss converting an abandoned warehouse into a community hub, a meeting with a school principal about implementing peer mentorship programs, and later that night, a gathering of the Bridge Circle, now grown into a full-fledged movement. But before all that, she had one more thing to do, something personal. The drive was short but familiar. She asked to be dropped near the same corner where her story began. The same bench, the same stretch of pavement, the same tiny crack in the sidewalk she used to stare at when the world ignored her. She walked slowly, almost reverently, through that forgotten alley. There were no cameras here now, no microphones, just the memory of a moment that changed everything. And there, sitting quietly under the faded awning of a closed bakery, was a man wrapped in an old brown coat. His beard was thick, his eyes tired. Melissa sat down beside him without a word. He didn't flinch. He didn't ask for anything. She reached into her coat and pulled out a steaming cup of coffee and a wrapped sandwich. "Here," she said gently. "It's still warm." He looked at her, confused. "Why?" She shrugged with a small smile. "Because I know what it's like to need something and not be able to ask." He hesitated, then took the cup. "Thank you," he murmured. "Most people don't stop." "I used to be most people," she replied. Then someone reminded me that stopping is how we change the world. The man nodded slowly, sipping the coffee. Melissa sat with him in silence, not waiting for gratitude, not trying to fix his life, just being there. As she stood to leave, he asked, "What's your name?" She paused, thinking, "Melissa. But most people just call me the girl with the $10 heart." His eyes widened in recognition. "Wait, you're her? The one from the video?" She smiled, a little sad and a little proud. That was just one moment. Anyone can have one. He looked at her like he didn't know whether to believe it, and she didn't need him to. As she walked back toward the street, a familiar voice called her name from behind. She turned, expecting a volunteer or someone from her team. Instead, it was Keanu, dressed in that same gray hoodie, hands in his pockets, eyes soft. "I had a feeling I'd find you here," he said. "How long were you watching?" she asked. "Long enough," he answered. "You're doing exactly what you were meant to." She laughed softly. "Funny. I thought I was meant to fade into the background. Then you proved fate wrong." They walked side by side through the city, not as mentor and student, not as celebrity and civilian, but as two human beings who had seen each other in their most honest forms. Melissa asked him something she hadn't dared ask before. "Why didn't you tell me who you were that day when I gave you the $10? He looked forward, his expression unreadable for a moment, then answered, "Because I didn't want you to give it to me. I wanted to know if you'd give it to anyone. So I passed the test?" she said, half joking. "It wasn't a test," he said. "It was a mirror." Melissa nodded slowly, understanding now what he had always meant. That day wasn't about him. It was about her. It was about what we do when no one is looking. What choices we make when we think they don't matter. They reached a small plaza where a sculpture stood, a bronze figure of a woman handing something small to a man on the ground. Melissa's breath caught in her throat. The plaque below it, "Read in honor of unseen kindness, inspired by the moment the world saw the value of $10. Her name wasn't mentioned, neither was his, but their story lived there, in metal and stone, where generations would pass by and perhaps remember to look at each other a little differently. "Do you think it's too much?" she asked him quietly. Keanu shook his head. "No, because it's not just about you anymore. It's about everyone who sees themselves in you." Melissa turned away from the statue and looked out across the plaza. A school group was approaching, young kids with backpacks and wide eyes. Their teacher pointed toward the sculpture and began explaining its story. One little girl turned to her friend and whispered, "I want to be like her one day." Melissa felt her eyes sting, not with sorrow but with something richer, gratitude. Not for the fame, not for the change in fortune, but for the chance to be the reason someone believed in something better. That evening, at the bridge circle, the room was more packed than ever. Rows of chairs filled with people who had suffered, fallen, gotten back up. Some were newcomers, still unsure. Others had found jobs, reconnected with family, discovered strength they thought was lost. Melissa took her usual seat, but this time, someone else stood to speak first. It was a teenage boy, probably no older than 17. His hands shook as he held the microphone. "I was gonna quit," he said, voice cracking. "Then someone showed me that video, the one with the lady giving her last $10. I didn't know her name, but I felt like she was telling me I mattered." He looked straight at Melissa. "Thank you," he said. "You saved someone without even knowing it." The room stood in applause, not for drama, not for show, but for truth. Melissa stayed seated, tears running down her cheeks, her hands over her heart. She didn't need to speak tonight. The message had already been delivered in the eyes of every person who had come back from the edge. Later that night, as the lights dimmed and the room emptied, Keanu approached her one last time. "Are you ready to let go of the past?" he asked gently. Melissa looked at the empty chairs, at the warmth still lingering in the air. "I don't need to let go of it, I just needed to stop carrying it alone." He smiled. "Then you've done it." They didn't say goodbye. They didn't need to. His work with her was done. Her work, with the world was just beginning, as he. Melissa walked out into the night, stars peeking out from behind the clouds. She felt it again. That fire, no longer a flicker in the cold, but a steady blaze of purpose. She had been the girl who gave $10. Now, she was the woman helping thousands rebuild their lives with just as much courage. And in the quiet of her mind, one sentence repeated, like a promise to the future. You can change the world without saving it all. Just start with one soul who thinks they're invisible.